Alright, so this is my second video summary. I'm going to talk about some of the new articles I've read that kind of might help me build my research paper for next week. Um, and so we can look at the one I've already talked about a little bit, where the headlines in like fake newspapers or fake articles or whatever can be used to kind of sway people. They get to look at them once, and if they see them again, they're more likely to trust that information and think that that might be accurate. And so, even if they know that it's false because they've seen it before, they have some kind of memory related to it. And so, that familiarity can create kind of a sense of false trust. Um, and then, so I've moved on to a second article that talks kind of more of the historical part of it, where you learn a lot of things early in life, and so familiarity is one of those things that can be learned early in life. And some of the examples they give are music. For example, you could say that you listened to rock music when you were a small child a lot of the time, and so as you grow up, you don't enjoy the other types of music. You still want that one specific type of music. Even if you think the others are good, you have that familiarity with that one. It has a different kind of meaning. And so they use a quote: we may think we know what we like, but we certainly like what we know, and research shows that. And that's going along those same lines. We certainly like what we know. If I've heard rock music and that's my favorite, that's what I'm going to always like. And so, you might think that you like some other type of music, but you don't really like it as much if you clearly listen to this other type more. And so it shows the connection kind of between familiarity and aesthetics. How something looks or how you perceive something is related to how much you might have seen it before. And so then in Article 3, we kind of bring religion into all of this. And I thought it was very interesting. A lot of these articles had kind of a recognition of religion. And religion is part of a truth. There is a lot of historical background on many religions, if you look at textbook religions. And so there's always this discrepancy between the truth versus the belief, because take any religion and there's still going to be personal beliefs that can't really be proven, and then there's historical truths that kind of build up that religion. But in this article, they kind of talk about religion in a more modern construct, where if I do something ritualistically, then it might still become a habit that I do, and it's almost becomes a religion how much some people invest into these activities. And so this is talking about how the aesthetics is kind of what shapes them into these religions. And an example in the book is like the dance culture. If you go out and party every weekend, every day even, that's becomes more of a religion. It's an aesthetic that you kind of subscribe to. And so when you hear about that, that's something that you're familiar with. And so then in Article 4, it talks about a little bit more of like the history of aesthetics and how much that can affect people's memory. So there is always the difference of history as it's written versus how it happened. And so I used a couple of quotes here that you can look at. They do a documentary where they talk to prisoners of war, and that's what they talk about in this article. And the individual Mal Singh, he talks about how he longs to go back to India because he had signed up for this war, and things just weren't going the way he thought they would. And so the documentary paints it as very bleak, and of course it is. If you're a prisoner of war, things aren't necessarily great. But that doesn't necessarily compare well to other people's memory, because in the presentation there's parts where there's video and then the screen goes black, and it adds some drama that's not necessarily always true. It's drama that's created by the documentary itself, not necessarily the experience. And so that shows some change in the familiarity. If I was there, I might be more familiar with it as it happened, but these added changes could make me remember it in a different light. And so we see that a lot in modern culture, where articles are written about one thing and then somebody changes one or two details, and we see another one, and we have to kind of pick which memory fits us best, even though we might not genuinely have a memory of either of those things. And then in conclusion, this is just to highlight the main points that I was kind of trying to figure out from these that I might be able to use for my paper. In the first one, headlines that are familiar are more likely to be shared. And so that's, regardless of truth isn't really a factor. It's just if you've seen it, you're likely to share it. and in familiarity begins subconsciously. And so that means that, some of these things that we might share, some of this misinformation might be just stories we've heard growing up or things like that, and it subscribes to what we think rather than what is actually true. And that familiarity, again, doesn't have to be true. It can just be things that we've heard. And then some modern religion is modeled after aesthetics rather than after understanding and truth. If you look at a lot of older religions, like, that's what they really emphasize is, oh, you have to understand it and you have to have this belief, and you have to understand this truth. And in modern culture, we don't really have that as much. People seek the experience of it, and there is their personal truth to it and things of that nature. But it's the familiarity that is what brings them to come back, not necessarily the information or the truth. And that's what we see in our last point, is that media as far back as the 1900s emphasized aesthetics over information. And so that's one thing that I think is pretty commonplace now, is that people try to market what they are putting out rather than actually giving you the straight details. And so that leads me to what I would like to be my potential question, and that's, is aesthetic more important than truth when sharing information? And so I'd like to research into that more as I'm writing my paper and figure out if I can find a question or a research that could be done to help try to get to the bottom of this. Because I feel like, obviously, truth should be more important than aesthetic, but in terms of sharing, in terms of propagating information, which one is more important?